Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
If you know any young people, you'll know that whatever you call the young people generation, they're really funny. I'm actually really disappointed that the youth are off-site today because they're really funny. My generation's grunge music and sarcasm look kind of cute and pathetic compared to their sophisticated irony and absurdity. But they are wearing the same clothes that we are. If you've walked through Cotton On lately and you're a 90s child, so maybe we'll cool once. The young people are also really dark in their humour. You guys are representing, sorry. Some say nihilistic. And if you're untouched by cynicism and don't live with three young people who are taller than you and smarter than you, you might not know what nihilism is. It's a belief that everything is ultimately pointless and meaningless. And I kind of get why young people have that humour, right? It kind of makes sense in the international and national climate at the moment. My daughter told me it's also called doomism, which makes more sense to me because there's that Simpsons episode where Lisa and Bart say we're all doomed. Actually, they were pretty nihilistic for 90s kids. Now you've got your head around that concept, my daughter also told me it's possible to be an optimistic nihilist. Isn't that the opposite? You would think that was the opposite. And I've got a quote here that she shared with me. Rather than collapsing into despair, many in the generation channel nihilism into a form of liberation because societal pressures and traditional markers of success feel unattainable. The future feels uncertain. Many embrace the mindset that nothing matters, and this is framed as a permission slip to let go of all conventional expectations, pursue personal passions, and assign their own meaning to life. That kind of makes sense in the context of the world as well, doesn't it? But it doesn't really make sense in the context of our faith. One of the ideas going around is that society is in a crisis of mattering. Has anyone heard that? There's a new book apparently that I haven't read. But mattering basically means, am I safe? Am I seen? Am I heard? Does my contribution count? And an article I read when I Googled that said when somebody stops believing their contribution counts, they don't usually leave dramatically. They disengage gradually and they risk sharing less of themselves in their community. And you know, anyone that works with young people or any people knows disengagement is a red flag because when you feel you don't matter or when there's not any sense of value or purpose or belonging, that leads to isolation, extremism, polarisation, othering, all the stuff we see on the news every day, and bitterness. I'm going to be honest, I'm feeling really bitter at the moment about the injustices happening this week with the NDIS and, you know, with the injustices happening to the most vulnerable people all over the world. And Hebrews 12:15 calls bitterness a root because it spreads underground before it shows up in your life and your relationships. Another quote, bitterness doesn't just replay the wound, it rewrites our significance. we start to draw conclusions like, I guess I don't matter, my voice doesn't count, I'm easily replaceable, nobody sees me. And that anti-mattering story is really, really far from what Jesus says. Jesus stops for individuals in crowds. Jesus calls people by name. Jesus entrusts really ordinary, uncool people with extraordinary responsibilities. He doesn't build this is not my quote, I wish it was. He doesn't build a kingdom with spectators, he builds it with people who matter. And Paul doesn't use weak language in Corinthians either. He says, God has arranged them, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be, and not just the strong. In verse 22, it says, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. So even if you're weak, you're necessary, you're essential, you're not optional. You matter in your weakness, you are indispensable, no exceptions. And when we take communion later, the table welcomes you to be part of the body of Christ and part of the community of Christ. That's an alternate in the world. And when we take the bread and wine, we're remembering what has been given for us, but we're also responding. So today when you come to the table, I want you to think of it not only as receiving, but maybe as participating, as not disengaging, as saying, I won't disengage in Jesus' work in the world. I will participate in that. At the table, we can hand over our bitterness, sadness, anger, nihilism, optimistic nihilism, whatever you bring today. That's probably just my list. And we can ask the Holy Spirit to replace it with the love and acceptance and compassion that the table represents. So, see you there.
I love seeing you guys. Love seeing you. I think it's a privilege. I've just been up in the northwest the last 12 days, and I'm a massive extrovert. My alone time. Steady, guys. Go easy, all right? It's not that funny. My quiet time is normally I'll go to my mum's house with like my brother and sister, and I need it like once a year, and I'll just go sit on the couch and watch telly with my whole family, which we're big loud Brazilians, and that's my version of quiet time. So when I spend 12 days straight in the northwest with no one to talk to, I start to click a little bit, but it meant that I was able to pour a lot of research into my message, which now I'm so sorry that you are all going to have to contend with as well. So look, it's going to get a little bit heady today. The best analogy I have for you is that today is going to be like a little bit of a silly straw. And you think we're going to be going this direction, we're going to cut back a little bit, and then, but you know what? The important thing is we're going to get there in the end, okay? I wanted to say a couple other things. Oh, Nikki, ripper communion message. If people aren't, sorry? Oh my gosh. We're just going to delete that from the podcast. I'm so sorry, Naomi. I want to die. Which ties in great with the communion message. If we're not playing Smells Like Teen Spirit on the way home today after this message and after that communion talk, then we haven't done our job, okay? So, yeah. Look, can we go to the first slide? Can anyone read that? Can anyone want to sing it or? Come on, there's got to be.
Yeah, okay.
Go on.
It's Pink Floyd.
And the congregation said, oh, well, all right, don't sound too enthusiastic. Today we're talking about money. So we're doing Matthew 6:19 to 34. And we'll talk about those verses in a second. But there was a couple of things, whilst I was in the Northwest, losing my mind, listening to back podcasts of Westcity and doing all my research. I listened to Trav's message. It was awesome. There was something that Trav had said, which I'm not going to quote verbatim because I'll butcher it, but basically about how it's so wonderful to have people rocking up in church and not putting on their church persona. And so the invitation for you guys is, be your weird, messy selves, because that's kind of actually what we deserve here. And hopefully you being a weird, messy self means that you can live outwardly as someone who points back to a community that has a support network that receives a weird, messy person on the day in, day out. So welcome, weird, messy people. The other thing that came up for me, Grace Bailey put me onto a podcast. I'll save you the whole run of it, but basically the quote that I got out of this podcast was that there's two types of preachers: those who tell you what you already know, and the ones that tell you things that you've never heard of before. And the struggle is that, well, first of all, different preachers do different things to different people, right? There are things that Kathleen and Theo and Chin will tell me that I've never heard before, and I feel like a dum-dum, but I love it. And then there are things that say, like Trav or Lauren or Phil will tell me that, like, you kind of need to hear from the front once in a while. You know, if you go too long without hearing it, if you go without hearing the, I'm a bit of a goofy dude and I stuff up, but Jesus loves me, it's an important role. And I think what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do today, is do a bit of both. I can't open up this topic of money without people feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So you're just going to have to let me carry you through to the end. Save your booze and all that stuff towards the end, okay? Ripper. Now, look, I've got some bits of paper that I've put on the right-hand side of your pews and the left-hand side of your pews, if you guys want to pull out those bits of paper and just pass them down the line. I know, I've rigged the building. And there's 3 questions that I'm going to ask you guys to write down on the piece of paper. Look, you might have extra bits of paper. If the message gets boring, use them as paper aeroplanes, fly them around the room, pass secret messages to your friends. It's up to you guys. But can we get the 3? There we go. Beautiful man. So these are the 3 questions. So number 1, if your house was burning down and you could only take what you could carry, what would you grab on your way out? House is burning, what do you grab? Number 2, once your house is burnt down, where would you go? Who would you call? Who would feed you? Who would clothe you? Name these different people that you could reach out to if you could. Number 3, imagine the kingdom has arrived. It's crash landed on earth, and you get to spend your time however you wish, in whatever version of heaven exists in your imagination. All right, there's no punishment on this one. What would you spend your time doing? Put together a perfect week or day or weekend or whatever. But those are the 3 messages, the 3 things. House is burning. What do you take? House is burning. Where do you go next? Kingdom's arrived. What do you do? All right, that's we'll figure that stuff out towards the end of the sermon. So. If anything gets boring, just keep elaborating on those and we'll pull it back, all right? Cool. So, to go to our text, next slide. Do not store up for yourselves, so Matthew 6:19 to 34. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you would be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. That's going to be an important one. Keep going. Next slide. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. If not life more than food, and the body more than clothes, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds you. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labour or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendour was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Pooey. All right. So I want to start thinking about money. And it might be the coins that you have in your car in your ashtray. It might be a $10 note that you got in your pocket. It might be a bunch of numbers in a bank app. And usually we consider these things rather neutral, like a tool. It just sits there inert, waiting for us to pull it out and to use it. And without us using it, it's inanimate, right? For today, I want us to think about money a little bit differently. I want you to think about money as a little living organism. And it's an organism that wants to rewire your brain, change your relationship with your neighbours, and also dictate who you ultimately worship. So in this scenario, we go from being the ones that feel like we hold the hammer to realising we might actively be the ones being managed by this competing active force. And that tension is exactly what we're pulling apart today. So we're going to be touching on, Book of Amos and some liberation theology and Walter Brueggemann and Gandhi and a few friends, all right? So this is the silly straw that I was talking about before. Not only is the timing of this message really great because, it's exactly where we landed in the sermon series that we're doing, but also we've just had the federal budget last week and there's been a whole lot of talk about that in the news. I hate referring to what's going on abroad, but also I don't know if anyone saw, the President of the United States took 10 of their top billionaires over to China to do some peace deal kind of thing. Like, the issue of money is kind of loud and pertinent. And there's also just the issues that you're contending with in your daily life, interest rates going up and all that stuff. So, it just feels pretty spot on. Actually, and also Cody's communion talk last week, which was fantastic. What did he say? He said, if you read Jesus' feeding miracles and don't conclude that Jesus doesn't want people to go hungry, you're missing the point, which I thought was really, really great. Can we go to the next slide? This is Mammon. We're going to talk about Mammon a little bit. But let's look at the architecture of the system that we're dealing with, because to resist commodification, we need to understand the mammonic machine itself. We can't talk about greed just as a simple character flaw when Jesus is talking about it as a quasi-religious force. Because there's this concept of mammon that comes up frequently that comes from an Aramaic word for wealth or property. But when Jesus talks about wealth, he's not talking about wealth as an inanimate object at all. He personifies it as a rival master or even a deity. He famously says you cannot serve both God and mammon, and the Greek word he uses for serve in this passage is the word doulion. Doulion translates it denotes absolute, unquestioning, ownership. So this text is kind of setting up an ontological conflict here. See, mammon isn't just your bank account, but it's the overarching ideology that demands your ultimate allegiance. So if mammon operates as a deity that requires your ultimate allegiance, what does its temple kind of look like? And there's this great theologian called Wesley Bergen who offers a brilliant answer to this. And he looks at modern economics and he compares it directly to ancient Levitical rituals. He analyses a modern meat packing plant to do this. And Bergen's analysis is actually pretty cool. And if you want, you can do it with your own workplace and places that you've worked, maybe in your youth and stuff. So let's think about an ancient temple sacrifice. It requires a highly formalised, rule-governed structure. You need pristine conditions, specific cuts of meat, a priest to perform the ritual, and an altar to appease some higher power. And so Bergen argues in a modern meatpacking plant, the butcher is the priest, the conveyor belt is the altar, and the ritualised slaughter is performed with great efficiency. So ask yourself, what is the higher power that needs to be appeased in this modern version? Who requires the temple sacrifice? Just any ideas? Sorry? Close. In this version, because we're looking at the larger construct of it. It's the market, the greater deity that needs to be served, and is the market. And what Bergen kind of goes on to say is that, is that essentially when the stock market is doing great and is going good, this is the summation of the deity's pleasure. When the market's great, the Mammon is pleased and blessing us. And when the market is doing poorly, there is unrest and anxiety, because if the market crashes, sacrifices must be made in order to restore order. And it sounds like a bit of a weird, funny way of looking things, maybe a little bit avant-garde, but it's not really a too distant reality from our world. Even at the imperial core, and we'll jump to the next slide, even at the imperial core and holy lands of Mammon, the United States, we see this so bizarrely played out. Many people might remember that earlier this year, there was a House Judiciary Committee question in which Pam Bondi, who was the Attorney General of the United States at the time, she was asked about the lack of indictments in the for Epstein co-conspirators. And she deflected the question quite bizarrely by saying, the Dow is over 50,000, the S&P over 7,000, and the NASDAQ is smashing records. American 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about. And this is in response to questions about justice for the mistreatment of humans and the trashing of their dignity, and where is justice for victims and survivors. She instead kind of praises Mammon here. Now, again, I want to point out, right? I'm not bashing a market system. I'm talking about a market ideology. Like, who is the ultimate deity that we allow to kind of reconcile whether there is justice or not? And what we're being told right here is we're being pointed towards the market's doing great. How dare you question it? We'll just go to the next slide. Now, to trudge through Mammon, we need to discuss neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is one of those heavy, overused academic words, and that we kind of get the vibe of it, but it's kind of important in this context that we frame it. So neoliberalism is an economic ideology that believes the free market should be entirely left alone to solve society's problems, and it highly prioritises small government, deregulation and privatisation. And how this ties into what we're talking about, Mammon, is that neoliberalism is what we call an endogenous theology, meaning it's a belief system that generates its own morality from within the market itself. So within this theology, financial success is viewed purely as a reward for hard work and merit, whereas the dark flip side of this ideology is that poverty is therefore seen as a moral failure. I'm seeing a few heads nodding. This is good. I thought I was going to lose you guys in the first half. So to connect this back to Bergen's idea of a demanding deity, you can kind of totally see how this theology demands sacrifice. In a strict moral neoliberal framework, taxing the wealthy to fund social programs for the poor is viewed as a fundamental injustice, like a sacrilegious interference within the market's divine judgment. The market is a self-regulating entity that literally requires the sacrifice of the non-competitive to maintain balance. Man, creation, the natural world, the least, last, lost, left out, the looked over, the global poor and the global south. That is the sacrifice that is made in this system. And the ideological framework is so pervasive that it even infiltrates the religious world itself. So Scott Bessenecker terms it the Christian industrial complex, and he details how modern religious missions that theoretically exist to serve the marginalised often end up mirroring for-profit trading corporations. And they adopt corporate structures, they value their employees primarily for their measurable productivity, and they focus on manipulating demand rather than fostering messy human connection. And I'll come back to this later, because we're also going into giving season in every church, and some of the groups that Westcity partner with, like Jera Uganda, the Foxglove Project, they have a beautiful alternative to this, which I'm really excited to talk to you guys about. But anyway, we'll press on. Another way of thinking of Mammon is similar to a social media algorithm. You could even go so far to say that social media is an adaptation of the complex, adaptable system of Mammon. Like thinking we're logging on to get what we want, entertainment, social connection, and information, much like money, think of it as a tool that we're in control of. But really, the algorithm is shaping our desires behind the scenes. It's capturing and monopolising our attention, and using us to create and sustain value for it. So we think we're the user holding the tool, but really we're kind of just the product being harvested. And to draw parallels with the mammon, the system requires your involvement to survive and suddenly molds your behaviour to ensure you keep feeding it. Anthea Snowsill, who many of you guys might remember, used to come to Westcity here, and if she didn't live thousands of kilometres away, I'm sure she'd be my best friend. She introduced me to this theory of the complex adaptable system, much like the endogenous theology of neoliberalism or mammon, or even our algorithms. The complex adaptable system grows, evolves, and adapts to maintain its survival, parasitically living off of its host, us, God's creation. So going back to money, if money is fundamentally paper or digital numbers in a banking app or a bond of credit held between you and your government, how does it gain this quasi-religious power over us? Like, how does it actually get its hooks into us? It gains power through the mechanism of what we call commodification. And if mammon operates as a rival system, the ultimate sacrifice that it requires is our humanity. It demands that we turn everything, our bodies, our time, our natural resources, into a product. Commodification happens when we take something out of the context of a relationship and isolate it and give it a market value. For example, the porn industry, and Mary Harrington, fantastic writer, does a lot of work on this, but the industry might wrap itself in language of self-expression, but it's a cold-blooded machine that preys on vulnerability and want. It takes sex, strips away all the humanistic and relational attributes of it, and it isolates it on a screen and turns human pleasure centres into a product to be bought and sold for profit. And it makes sex homeless, basically, right? It taking it out of relationship and putting it on a digital shelf, removed from even knowing the basic details between the seller and the consumer, and selling it for a subscription fee. But commodification is not a new phenomenon at all. Can we go to the next slide? To refer to the prophet Amos, and I'll let you guys read this for a second. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended, that we may market wheat, skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. Now, historical context here is vital. Amos was living in the 8th century BCE, a time of booming prosperity and economic trading in Israel. But Amos was absolutely furious because that wealth was incredibly concentrated at the top. Amos offers a devastating critique of a society so consumed with the market that the elites could literally not wait for religious festivals and the Sabbath to end. Like, they were literally tapping their feet because they just wanted to get back to the market where they could artificially inflate prices and cheat the helpless. And he famously condemns them for selling, quote, the needy for a pair of sandals, because the terrifying truth is that once human value is detached from inherent dignity and tied to strictly market value, a human life is only worth that what you can trade it for. That's the cold math of it. And if a person is only worth a pair of sandals to the economy, that's what they're going to be sold for. Which brings me to a conceptual framework proposed by many people's favourite theologian, Walter Brueggemann, who suggests that every society faces a stark choice between two ways. One is a lethal rat race of self-enhancing commodity driven by endless greed, anxiety, and the pursuit of celebrity. And two, the alternative way is a life of relational community, a life preoccupied with the love of neighbour and recognising mutual humanity. Now, before we get a little bit too lost down the rabbit hole of Kai is trying to radicalise us, and yes, I am, right? I want you to read your Bibles and love your neighbours and love God, and that is exactly what I want to radicalise you towards. But you may be thinking, surely we need some basic level of commodification in order for this, world to work. We have to have some basic degree of trading right. Like, I don't want to go clean portaloos in my spare time. I don't want to cremate bodies. I want to do traffic control unless someone's actually paying me to do this thing, right? Like, you want to go get a loaf of bread, you give me money, I give you a loaf of bread. We have to have some sort of basic trade. And the vital distinction I want to make is the market economy. The basic exchange of goods and services, like buying bread, is completely necessary for our broad, complex society to function. The danger arises when a market economy morphs into a market ideology, mammon. And that is when the market ceases to be a helpful tool for exchanging goods and becomes the ultimate judge of human worth. When the logic of the market dictates the needy can be discarded or sold for sandals because they don't produce enough capital, you've crossed from a market economy to a market ideology. So for a visual picture, it's the difference between using scales to weigh grain and using those same scales to weigh a person's right to exist. Come on. And when the human value is tied strictly to market value, the natural psychological result for the entire population is intense systemic anxiety. Which brings me to one of the most important parts of today. Can we go to the next slide? When Jesus says, do not worry about your life or what you will eat or what you will drink, which to the modern ear sounds like a lovely cross-stitch pillow that you would find at your nana's house. And I'm sure some people have one here, and that's fine. This is the Christian equivalent of don't worry, be happy. But when you dig into the socioeconomic reality of first century Galilee, you realise how dangerously radical that statement really was. Because we're talking about an agrarian society where 2 to 3% of the population who were urban elites or Roman officials actually control almost all the wealth in the land. And peasant farmers at the bottom they're facing this crushing burden where there's imperial taxes, there's religious taxes, there's tolls, and these things take up between 30 and 40% of their total yield. And if a drought hit and you're a peasant farmer and you're losing 30 to 40% of whatever your yield in taxes, and if a drought hits and a crop fails, you can't declare bankruptcy. There we go. So what do you do as a peasant farmer then? Your one means of feeding your family, of taking care of everyone is gone. You would be forced to borrow seed or money from wealthy patrons at astronomical interest rates, and this often led them directly into defaulting on their land, becoming tenant farmers, and eventually falling into debt slavery. So in that terrifying context, worry isn't just a psychological neurosis or lack of faith. It is a completely rational response to life-threatening insecurity. It's survival. And there's this fascinating thing that I looked at when I was doing my research, and there's a guy called Sakari Heckenham. Anyway, loved him. And he wanted to see how this text sounded to people actually facing real-life extreme poverty. And so he was in Kinawananga in Tanzania, and which is a community that are intimately intertwined with the realities of poverty. And he read them the Do Not Worry passage. And their reaction was incredibly. They told him if we stopped worrying about our daily food and clothing, we would starve. Life would be really bad. And the passage simply didn't make sense to them in a context of ongoing daily survival, which raises the ultimate question. Why would Jesus tell desperately impoverished people and overtaxed people on the brink of debt slavery, don't worry, right? Oh, God is not setting us up to fail, but we need to ask the question around the text, because otherwise the text without a context is a sure sign we're being conned, right? The text without a context is a sure sign we're being conned. And so why would Jesus tell us, don't worry? The historical text suggests that his command to look at the birds of the air wasn't a call to laziness or a denial of their material reality. It was a direct, pointed subversion of the wealthy elite's barn culture. So, because the Roman and Herodian system relied on building massive storehouses as barns to store the grain, which allowed them to control the population through artificial scarcity. And Jesus is pointing out that the birds don't build massive barns to hoard their wealth. And importantly, the command, don't worry, was an invitation to join an entirely alternative community. Jesus was inaugurating an economy of grace. And in this community, followers shared their resources, so radically weaving together such a tight social fabric that no single individual had to bear the crushing anxiety of survival alone. Like a trapeze artist, you can only let go of the swinging bar, which in this case is the anxiety, the hoarding, the desperate clinging to your own meagre resources, if you know that there is a strongly woven social safety net below you to catch you if you fall. The safety net is the committed alternative community. And this construct of the structural safety net is deeply explored in the sociological framework of Latin American liberation theology. and it was spearheaded by people like Gustavo Gutierrez in the 60s and 70s. Now, context is everything, right? So the movement started in slums in Latin America by priests living in amongst starvation, right next to immense concentrated wealth. They realised that traditional theology wasn't addressing the systemic realities keeping these people poor and vulnerable. And out of that context, Gutierrez defines what became known as the preferential option for the poor. The core idea here is that God is not a neutral observer in history. When push comes to shove, God actively takes sides with the marginalised and the oppressed against systems that oppress them. But Gutierrez makes a crucial distinction. He says that blessing the poor does not mean blessing poverty itself. Poverty is not a romantic spiritual value, it is the denigrating and degrading destructive force of human dignity. Or to quote Gandhi, poverty is the greatest form of violence. Liberation theology argues that solidarity means joining the struggle to end that violence, and it requires recognising that extreme poverty isn't usually an accident or a failure or bad luck, it's systemic. Overwhelmingly, it's the result of structural injustices and market ideology that privilege a few whilst marginalising the many. Which brings me to probably the most important part of today's text, the practical steps. Without practical steps on what do we do, the message is just useless, right? If Mammon operates as a systemic machine that commodifies life and generates massive anxiety, and if the antidote to that machine is the safety net of a radically community, what does it actually look like on a, say, Tuesday Arvo? How do we do it? How do we actively avoid commodifying our neighbours? The first major step is to practice relational communion daily. This is about refusing to view the people in the world around you as objects for your own use or your own advancement. Or to quote my favourite theologian, Wendell Berry, the universe is composed of subjects to be communed with and not sub-objects to be exploited. The universe is composed of subjects to be communed with, not objects to be exploited. I love that. Finding small, consistent ways to relate to others, especially those that society deems invisible or less valuable, as subjects, as friends, rather than as transactions or obstacles or objects. Stubbornly prioritising people over material gain. And it sounds simple, but it's incredibly difficult to execute in a culture entirely wired for accumulation and efficiency. And there's this great little anecdote that illustrates this. A pastor takes his youth group to serve meals at a homeless shelter. And one of the kids asks one of the homeless people there the classic question, you know, if I'm on the street and someone asks me, can I borrow some money, what do I do? Do I give it to them? Do I not? And the response was this: look, give me money, don't give me money, that's up to you. But acknowledge me, treat me as a person, say hello, because I spend the rest of my time being ignored. I think this is wonderfully profound. It's kind of the essence of resisting the commodification. Just acting like someone is not there because they're an inconvenience. recognising your neighbour's humanity, to not be treated as an invisible object or an annoyance in someone's day. On a macro level is through some of the awesome communities that our Westcity community is actually in direct relationship with through the global purse. Jera Uganda that I mentioned before, Foxglove, Grassroots Rwanda. These guys, we partner with communities who work to empower women living in extreme poverty, but it's not done through massive, heavy capital development models and just swooping in with foreign cash and treating the women as passive recipients of aid. Instead, these groups they utilise SHGs or self-help groups, and they encourage these women to look at the social and relational aspects they already have in their community. By pulling tiny amounts of savings together and supporting each other's small businesses, they prove that intercultural friendship and local grassroots empowerment can actually completely subvert traditional money-centric development models. They are literally building the safety net from the ground up, relying on trust rather than massive capital, relationship rather than commodification. Which connects to something that we call the treasure principle that we read earlier in the text. Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. And the phrasing in this is incredibly intentional, by the way. It doesn't say that your money follows your heart. It says that your heart follows your treasure. The principle is that wealth fundamentally transforms the heart. You have to choose carefully what you want and what you want to invest in, because you will inevitably begin to value and protect it, potentially at the expense of everything and everyone else. So the idea of storing treasures in heaven isn't about collecting spiritual frequent flyer miles for the afterlife. It means investing your actual resources right now into things that have lasting value, like human dignity, like water, like justice, rather than just building a bigger barn to protect your accumulated surplus. At its core, prioritising people over material gain. But practically speaking, how does someone living in a modern hyper-capitalist society, someone who has a mortgage or weekly rent or superannuation savings and kids to feed and clothe and educate and, cop bad, nihilistic comments from and stuff, Like, how do we do this without just going, stuff, I'm going to go live in the bush? The frameworks that I've been talking about today don't require us to be taking vows of absolute poverty to dismantle the global economy overnight. It's fundamentally about the lens of our decision making. Are we utilising the market, or is the market utilising us? It's about regularly auditing our choices to ensure that the wealth is serving human dignity rather than allowing humans to be sacrificed to serve wealth. It's choosing in 1,000 small daily decisions to ensure our financial security doesn't depend on human or environmental degradation or the invisibility of someone else. But in short, it's kind of like this. You've heard it before, we've probably said it for years up here. Look at your superannuation, look at your banks, look at where your money actually is. If these things are investing in programs that don't actually reconcile with the world that we want to see, then take your money out of it and put it into things, into the world, into places that you want your world to look like. Outside of that, how do we do it on a small, little daily basis? Well, thankfully, the bits of paper that you guys hopefully might have written on actually kind of come in handy here. The things that I'm going to just imagine, I'm not going to ask anyone to call out what they wrote down, but the things that I imagine that you guys would have written down, number one, on what are you actually going to, thank you, on what are you actually going to carry out of your house if it's burning down. I'm sure that I don't think anyone here is too worried about having massive bags of cash stored under their beds. It's likely that you guys would have picked up small things that represent relationship. Maybe something that was owned by your grandfather, your mother, whoever. And I want to ask, with the time that you're likely to spend in this future kingdom when heaven crashes here on earth, the ways that I can imagine people wanting to spend their time is, again, with people doing wonderful things and not having to commodify their time, spending their time at work or commodifying their resources. I can imagine connecting with people that we've long lost and loved would be at the top of our mind. Being able to see people again. In my mind, I'd love to just play volleyball and in the sun and kick the footy and jump in the water and hang out with people. But this is the relational community that we need to be thinking about and to live out in those ways. I would ask you to consider, how is it that you actually live as though the kingdom is coming? How do we actually start to live those things today in terms of, are we actually spending our time with those people? Are we actually reaching out to those people? And lastly, if your house has burnt down, who would you call? I would love to hope that members of this community would feel as though they could call other members of this community. The church is a wonderful sign of what the world can be. And you and I all have a duty to continually make sure that this church is continually becoming what the world can be. And so if you're without clothes and without food and without shelter, just like the person sitting next to you, I would also hope that you called me. But it is such a beautiful thing to be called upon by people that you love. It is such a privilege when they call for you, like a parent going after their child who is crying. It is such a privilege to be the one to get to be there to pick someone up. It is so nice to receive the phone call saying, "I need a hand." And so, as the messy, weird community, please be calling out to your neighbours and pulling them into closer relationship, because when you pull people in, the relational safety net that is the Westcity Community Church gets tighter. And the tighter the safety net is, the more willing we are to let go of the swinging bar. I'm going to invite up the band. Guys, thank you so much. I love I love this community so much, and thank you for allowing me to share things that sometimes can feel a little bit uncomfortable to write. Writing about money in a context, in the context that we're in, is a difficult thing, and trying to straddle these things gets a little bit hard. But look, we're going to move on to communion. So this is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. And it is made ready for all those who love God and want to love God more. So come, you who have much faith and you have little, you who have been here often and you come for the first time, you have tried to follow and you who have failed, come, because it is the Lord who invites us, and it's God's will that those who want Christ should receive him here. So come.
Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at Westcity, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.